the quote I found is from Colin Powell. It's the number 7 of his 13 rules of life. You can't make someone else's choices. You shouldn't let someone else make yours. And is that not what we talk about when we talk about cybersecurity? Is that not what we talk about when we talk about hacks, when we talk about people like Facebook, front of the morning news a week ago, and all of the things that are happening in cybersecurity, all the hacks, and people don't understand the protocols. They don't understand what they need to do. And I saw something else. The author, Tori M. Wheeler, said about security. Security is public good. You don't get as much of it if you try to only protect yourself as you do if you work to protect the whole community and the others do the same. And that's people stepping in like our speaker today. She's an author, she's an attorney, she's a speaker, Lori Meyer Nugent. She founded LMN, Legal Consulting, and Appetite for Opportunity. And she's been a go-getter literally all her life. As a cybersecurity privacy expert, she's worked with Fortune 500 companies. She's helped establish protocols for airlines, for casinos. And when you look at her Vita, there's so much there. It could take 30 minutes to really go through it and introduce you. But Lloyd's of London, she collaborated as their senior advisor and lead consultant for so many of these companies. First lawyer in her family. And while she was in law school, or when she was in college, she studied political science and she fell in love with the Constitution. And if that's not what we need more of today, I don't know what else it is. She was able to put a book together on punitive damages as a first-year associate. When damages were exceeding compensation awarded to punish the defendant, Lori came up with a unique idea. The punishment in civil should never exceed their maximum criminal fine out there. Earlier in her career, she got a chance to defend this. She submitted an amicus brief to the U.S. Supreme Court on special privilege and was able literally to influence the Supreme Court and was invited to participate in a major discussion on the topic of the amicus brief that she submitted. She was the only woman out of the 10. She was 10 years younger than anybody in the room. And the brief her team submitted was adopted by the Supreme Court, and it's still used as standard case law today. The book she wrote, Thompson West grabbed a hold of it. It's still required reading in most law schools. And then she went to California. What can I say? She went to work in San Francisco with the tech crazies. But she says this was before the dot-com crash. So she had a chance to get in there and influence. And the amazing thing about it was when California entered their first breach notice statute in 2003, these regulatory policies were the ones Lori had already put in place in 2000. So working with insurance carriers, telling them what they can't do. Oh, I like that. Working with companies, telling them what they should do, and working with people who've been kicked in the butt and trying to help them fix what has happened. That's our speaker today, folks. So ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Lori Nugent, attorney at law, defender of the free. Lori, welcome.
You're amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is off.
Yep. Put this up here. Beautiful. Well, thanks, everybody. It's great to have the opportunity to speak to all of you today and talk a little bit about cybersecurity and privacy. I know those topics usually make people get very worried. There's a reason for that, but there's a flip side to it. And I'd like to talk a little bit about flipping the story. So that's the thing on the screen right now is the first page on my webpage. And the goal of the reason that I created my own firm was to be able to be more nimble and help organizations learn to thrive in disruption. Now, at the time I thought of that, I was thinking disruption in cybersecurity, but there's the pandemic thing too. So we're going to flip the story today. We want to flip the story, and instead of spending too much time talking about the terrible, horrible things that are happening, and I will give you some of that because I promised to tell you how much ransomware costs. So we'll do that. But we want to flip the story and talk about how you make cybersecurity and privacy your competitive advantage. Have you heard that one before? Excellent, excellent. Okay. Now, how many of you have received a breach notice? Yeah. So when I first gave speeches about cybersecurity and asked that, we'd get maybe 2 or 3 people raise their hands. Not so much anymore. So the first and most important thing that we do as we look to take digital disruption opportunities is we try and de-risk them, because every new technology has both benefits and risks, and you need to look real hard at those risks and balance them out and see what you can do. So one of the first things we want to do, we want to avoid the lemons. How many of you have ever purchased technology that you understood from the sales team was going to do great stuff that really didn't quite deliver on the promise? Yeah? Okay. So that's still going on, right? Because a lot of times in the real world, when you have a sales team selling a new technology, the new technology is still being developed and refined. So the sales team is using something that's been put together for the presentation to y'all, right? And so the actual product that exists when it is delivered to you may be different. And it's not that they're trying to do bad things, it's just different. And they're developing and trying to make it better. So we want to make sure that we don't take any lemons, and then we look for the good opportunities, right? So the first step in looking for a good cybersecurity opportunity is don't be a lemming. If everybody is rushing to product X, the chance that you'll be first to market is almost none. And the haste in which people are buying that product and installing it to try and be early to market means that they're doing it in a rushed way and they may not get their cybersecurity and privacy right. So if everybody's running this way, don't jump off a cliff. Make sure it's a good product that actually fits your organization. It delivers services that your people need, and it works for you, right? And check references. Lots of people get a product that results in a breach, and I'm like, okay, well, what did you do to make sure that it was a good product? Because I'm trying to defend them and prove that what they did was reasonable, right? So how do we prove it's reasonable? Well, we talked to people and we made sure it was a good product. Who'd you talk to? That's not a good answer, right? Because we want to talk about how you're going to be legally defensible in the choices you make in cybersecurity and privacy. So we need to make sure it actually works for you, make sure that you check references, and be careful about the cliff dive that we often see in cybersecurity, where everybody rushes here and they do X, and they do it really fast and probably not very well. Also, when you find one that's a good one for you, make a check internally about cybersecurity and privacy. What does your team need to see in order to approve your product? Are there roadblocks? If there are roadblocks, how do we get through that? One of the things that I do sometimes when a sales team has a fabulous product and they want to get to market like yesterday, and they know that their protocol takes a really long time, sometimes I'll go out and assess the product. And if we need to bring a technologist in, I have technologists in my network that can help with that. And we can put together a report that can be used internally to expedite the review process so that you can get the product to market faster. Because if the team doesn't have to do as much lifting to review the cybersecurity and privacy, maybe it can move a little faster. Now, it doesn't work everywhere, but it's something worth looking at. Now, that's the way sales can fast track their digital disruption technology. Also, as you're trying to build your new technology, it's important to get consensus within the leadership team throughout the organization, because that obviously helps you move things forward. And it also means you've got better buy-in when you start rolling it out. People understand what's coming and they're excited about it. All right. One of the things I promised was that we would talk about ransomware in real people terms, not technology terms. And since I'm a lawyer, one of my jobs is to make the technology experts explain it to me so I could explain it to my mom. Because if I can't explain it to my mom or my neighbor, then we don't actually really understand it. We just heard you. We want to understand this stuff. And when you're talking with tech folks, yeah, right? when we're talking with tech folks, we want to make sure that if you don't understand them, you let them know and say, one of the things I always do is say, that's really interesting. Can you explain it to me in a simpler way? And most of the time they're thrilled to do it. So ask. When I talk with tech folks and say, do you explain it in sort of a simpler way to people? They're like, nobody ever asked me to. They understand. Like, no, they don't. So the simple version of ransomware, what's ransomware? It's a piece of technology, software, or an executable, which is sort of a techie term, that gets passed through the internet and lands on your computer. There are different ways that happens. That's stuff you don't need to really worry about. So it lands on your computer, and when it executes, well, when it lands, it's going to phone home to mama, talk to the command and control center, and say, what do you want me to do now? And then the ransomware technology will be told by command and control to execute on such and so day. Now, if it's the kind that automatically locks down all of the computers that are connected to it and that you've connected to, it's going to probably do that on a weekend or a holiday, really a big holiday like Easter or Christmas, or pick your holiday, 4th of July. My kids laugh at me when I say, oh, great, we're going to have some time this holiday weekend. They're like, no, you're not. You're going to have a breach. Just wait. They're mostly right. It's the way it works. So ransomware gets on your machine and it executes, and it can do many things. One of the things it can do is basically encrypt everything that's on your computer and then go to all of your contacts' computers in the network and tie them all up too. And that can happen really, really, really fast. It can also load other malware into your system that can execute if they fix it. So when you're fixing a ransomware situation, you have to look and make sure that the data that comes back online is actually secure and doesn't have other problems built into it. So when the ransomware executes, it locks your system, or sometimes it will exfiltrate data and then lock your system, which is kind of double dipping because now you have a data breach and a ransomware attack. Awesome. That means if you've done your backup and you can recover your data and put it back up so you're not worried about that ransomware, well, you got a data breach. So at least you didn't have ransomware too, or at ransomware that worked. One of the things that folks want to know is, so when it hits, how much does it cost? Because everybody's afraid of that. That's in the news like crazy, and it's getting worse. So you have to think about your day-to-day practices. What are you doing to protect yourself when, not if, ransomware hits you? And if you're prepared and you know what you're doing and you test that, then you know you're going to be okay-ish. You're going to be okay enough. Whatever ish and enough is up to you, right? So if you do your data recovery and you don't have to pay ransom, that's fabulous. But many companies are caught where everything is locked, and it would take weeks or months to replicate their system enough by contacting their business partners to get copies of things. Ugh, not ideal, right? So there's a great temptation to pay the ransom. Sometimes when there's also a data breach and they're threatening to release sensitive information about people, that's more incentive to pay a ransom. I have had clients that have considered paying ransom. I don't encourage it because it's building a war chest for them to do more of the same. But there are times when you can understand why people would make that choice. Don't ever negotiate with the folks yourself, because many times the folks that you'd be negotiating with are organized crime. And you don't want to play in an arena that's above your weight, and that one is. So, we have contacts that do negotiate. So if you ever get in that situation, we can connect you with those folks, but hopefully you won't be in that situation. Now, when we look at downtime, The downtime is how much time does it take you to replicate all of your stuff? The data breach we talked about, reputational impact. You know, we see that all the time. So-and-so had a data breach, so-and-so had a ransomware attack. But what you don't necessarily see in the news is when the ransomware takes you down, it takes away your ability to communicate effectively with your clients, with your customers. It takes away your ability to do business. So when you're looking at insuring yourself for cybersecurity risks, if you're thinking about doing that, you need to insure for your breach, you need to insure for your ransomware, and you also need to think about insuring for the business interruption for the period of time it's going to take you to get back up on your feet. So we do have breaches with and without, or breaches with or without ransomware. And one of the questions I get all the time is, well, why can't we just stop breaches? And my answer is they're completely unavoidable. If you're connected to the internet, you will be breached, period, full stop. That's it. Think about it. The attackers are everything from small organizations or individuals to foreign governments that have a group in their military, an arm of their military that hacks. That is their job. They do it to disrupt their enemies. They also do it to make money, but they're intentionally disrupting. So you're taking the best and the brightest of a country that have been pushed into the military, that have funneled into the military, who are really, really good at attacking because that's been their job for decades, right? Now, if I'm the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer of an organization, my team and I have to get it right all day, every day, 24/7, period. And we have to get it right against those nation state attackers, the military attackers from other countries. The attackers only have to get it right once, just once. So if you think about it that way, of course you can't be right all day, every day, forever. Of course, somebody's eventually going to get in. It doesn't matter how good you are, somebody's going to get in. So you need to be prepared to address it when they do. Again, you want multiple regular backups, full backups. You want to make sure they're stored outside of your system and cloud, because another little nasty trick that happens with some of the ransomware is it will take all of your backups that are in your cloud and encrypt them too. So your backups are now dead too. That's not a good day. Another thing that's really important is you want to test your recovery plan regularly. So first of all, you want to have a plan. Second of all, you want to test a plan and make sure it actually works. And then you need to make sure everybody knows who's responsible for what, because you don't want to have little turf wars going on while you're fighting a big thing. And then you want to make sure that you have key contact information in hard copy form. Sounds real simple, but you would be surprised the number of folks that call my little cybersecurity bat phone and they're like, I need to contact this key person, but nobody knows their number. And it's the weekend, so they're not at the office. What do we do? Obviously pre-pandemic, right? But you have to have that data separate from your systems, because you have to remember in preparing for ransomware, your system is going to be unavailable to you, possibly completely unavailable. Okay, now we're going to talk about some real examples for real people. This is more fun. I always apply what I call the old dragnet rule, just the facts, ma'am, and the names have been changed to protect the innocent. So we're not telling you the real names of any of these folks, but they're from live cases that I've had. So the first one is a security company's experience when ransomware went across the office. So I happened to be there working with them on cybersecurity and privacy, doing some training. And somebody pulled me out of the room and said, we've had a ransomware attack. I was like, oh, well, how's it going? What do you need? And it turned out that it went from one machine and rapidly got to about 50 machines. And then it transferred from their main office to 2 of their other offices, where they had to shut it down remotely, which is really interesting because they don't have the same level of tech person remotely that they do there, and the tech person there was dealing with there. So that's a challenge. They were able to shut it down before it infected all of their offices throughout the country. And they were able to shut it down to just those 2 operations and a limited number of machines. But the real lesson to that is it happens really, really fast. And it depends on how well your plan works, how many of your machines get stuck, encrypted before you can shut it down. So another question is, should you pay? Can you pay? Will you get your data back? How does that all work? We talked a little bit about, it's a complicated situation, and we can talk about that more later if there's time. We also have to have a plan and test it. Now, the reason I get so excited about testing your data recovery plan, which frankly sounds really deadly dull and boring, right? You're going to test your data recovery plan. Ooh, yeah. The reason you do that, we had a very large client that had a record-breaking breach in its industry. That's not ideal. They had over 20 state and federal regulators investigating them all separately. And they had consolidated class actions that sought $6.5 billion with a B dollars in recovery. When that was going on, one of the things the regulators were very concerned about was their data recovery plan. And so they needed to test it because they hadn't tested it. So they tested it and they were sure it was really going to go great. And it did go great. They recovered all of their data, but they forgot to recover their special applications that had been made for them and customized. So they had data, but no applications to put them on. That was not a good day. But it's better to do that in a test than it is to do it live when you have to rely on getting that data back. So it's really important to do that test. Okay, here's some stats for the people who want detail. And I know, some people like it and some people don't. So bear with us if you're a don't. 27% of the incidents in 2020 involved ransomware. So that's over a quarter of the reported incidents. That was a 715.8% increase from 2019 to 2020. So that doesn't even count to 2021. Boy, I wish I could have an increase like that in my business, huh? Okay, and it's estimated that it's predicted that the cost for damages for ransomware this year will be $20 billion with a B dollars. Now, a thing that surprises people sometimes is that, if you want to use ransomware, you have somebody that you want to use ransomware with, you don't have to know how to code. Isn't that crazy? You don't have to know how to code at all, because they're selling ransomware as a service, just like software as a service. You can go and get ransomware as a service and just, buy it and it gets executed and you get paid your share of it. It's a business, like really a business. And they're making a lot of money these days. So the first half of 2021, you'd get different numbers from different companies that do ransomware and data breach work. So there's not like one source for all of these numbers. So if you look up the numbers and you get a slightly different number, that's why. One of the organizations that tracks this, the first half of 2021, just the first half, the average ransomware demand was 5.3 million, and that was up 518% from 2020. And the average ransomware was $847,000, the average demand. That would be a really bad day in my life. Now, if it's a single victim of the ransomware, so not a big company, just a person, in the first half of 2021, the highest single ransom demand that they saw was 50 million, and that was up from 20 million in 2020. Now, remember, sometimes when they're doing that kind of ransomware attack, they've been in your system for a long time, and they probably have your tax returns and anything else that you've flipped back and forth, like, I don't know, your bank account statements and things. So they actually know what you have. And they're going to take an amount that they believe you can pay that will hurt but won't cause you to not pay. And a lot of these ransomware attacks have been socially engineered. So they've spent the time to do the research and development to make sure that the way that they engage with you causes you to panic and pay and to not call the police or not call the FBI or not get one of the expert negotiators involved. Another important thing to talk about, one of the saddest things I see are small to mid-sized businesses that have tight margins, don't have much in the way of reserves, don't have insurance, that get hit with these things. Now, so far, touch wood, I've never had a client in that space or any space that's gone bankrupt because of a breach or a ransomware incident I've been involved in. That's very lucky, and I appreciate that. But if you've got a ransomware gang demanding $10,000 to $50,000, or depending on how long they've been in your system, more because they know you have it, it affects cash flow in a very negative way very quickly. And it can trigger loan covenants. And if it triggered loan covenants, then it becomes a spiral down. That's the reality of a breach in a small to medium-sized business or a ransomware attack that's significant. So it's really important to make sure that you have an answer other than going bankrupt. Insurance can help. Insurance is a tricky space right now. Okay. Another few quick points for perspective. Cyber attacks are up 400%. That was from the FBI. The FBI has reported up 400% since the pandemic. Nation states are involved in 10% of the attacks. So your poor cybersecurity person is facing the military nation state actors 10% of the time. Another thing that surprises a lot of people is that C-suite folks are real targets. Why? If anybody gets an exception to the rules of cybersecurity and privacy in an organization, it'll be the CEO, the chairman of the board, the C-suite executives. Why? Because they're too busy to be bothered with that stuff. Please don't make me deal with you as a witness if that's your answer, because it doesn't go well. There's not a lot I can, you're not giving me anything to work with, right? So, C-suite execs are 12 times more likely to be pursued by these bad actors and 9 times more likely to be victimized. That is significant and real. When we get involved with large corporations or corporations with executives that have notoriety, or however you want to put that, we oftentimes will make sure that there's special cybersecurity and privacy protection for those executives, not just on the company devices, but on the personal devices, because you don't want the bad guys to migrate from the personal devices to the company devices, which is ridiculously simple. So if you're at a large corporation and you don't have your execs specially protected, we should talk. Organized crime is estimated to be involved in 55% of the incidents in 2020, so slightly over half. Think about whether you want to negotiate your ransom now. Okay, another attack that we're seeing a lot is the electronic fund transfer fraud. Big, nasty lawyery name. Ugh. What that really is somebody takes over an account and instructs somebody else to transfer funds to a different account than they would normally use. And the person voluntarily transfers those funds, which means it's fraud, but not theft. Isn't that weird? So the way they take over the account is usually through email. Business email compromise is part of it. That's another term you'll hear a lot in the industry. It just means somebody hacked into your email and took over. And these folks are not going to take over and say, ha ha, I got your email. What they do is they take over, they sit in the background, they communicate with people that you communicate with, and they have all of their communications go into a special folder that you don't know really exists because you're not paying attention. And so you don't ever see those communications. Sneaky. And part of the communications often are to get wire transfers made. So a couple of real world examples. Again, I'm not telling you the names of these clients, and we're protecting the innocent there. There was a new CEO, a real tough character, real stickler for everything being right. difficult with his people. And there was a CFO who had been there for a long time. The CEO went on vacation with his family, posted pictures on Facebook. They're all having a great time. Fabulous. The CFO gets an urgent email from the CEO. And because the bad guys had been in the system for a long time, it really sounded like him, really sounded like him. So it's not like the old ones where you could tell because the language wasn't right. Not only is the language right, but the cadence is appropriate and the manner in which they communicate is like your person. So she got this communication and they said, hey, we're here with the family. Here's a picture, which they'd stolen from the Facebook account of the CEO. There's this deal that we have to handle. It's really urgent. And I absolutely have to have you transfer the money to us today. We need $500,000. And so the CFO had a little bit of a conundrum. Do you disappoint your new CEO? Do you do what he says? It's his email. And, check to make sure, you can pull up and see whether the email is really coming from the person you think it is. It was the right email. It was that person's account. Sure sounded like him. So she held her nose and did it. And she did it 4 times. Millions, plural. Large global Fortune 500 company. Very experienced CFO and CEO. Well, because he was out of reach, we're going to be on the boat today. How easy is that for the bad guys, right? I mean, they're good. They're really good. So she did this. He came back from vacation. She saw him in the hall and said, hey, I took care of those wire transfers for you. What wire transfers? That was not an awesome day. That was not an awesome day. I got the phone call, and the first thing they said is, we're going to fire the CFO. I said, oh no, your best choice is to learn your lesson, because you've already done that. And your CFO will now become the poster child for cybersecurity and privacy in your organization. And the biggest message I have for everybody here today in the room and online, and thanks y'all for being online, appreciate you, is make sure that you're not the person that does that. Make sure that you're paying attention to cybersecurity and privacy. And part of the reason I'm saying that is personal story. I was at a client in Las Vegas. We were building their privacy function. And at the same time, we were working on their GDPR compliance, which we had from Valentine's Day to May 25th to accomplish. It usually takes a year-ish. We did it, barely, but we did it. That's what counts. I got called out of a meeting because I had a phone call from my dad, and my dad never called me during the business day because he knew I was working. So I was like, well, what's going on, Dad? And he said, I just got a call from his grandkid, my son, Cole. And Dad said that Cole said he was in jail and he didn't want to call me because he was really upset and didn't want to upset me. And he knew I was working, and, he was embarrassed and he wanted Grandpa to pay. Now, my daddy wasn't born yesterday. And, at the time he was 94 years old and bored. And so he kept him on the line and talked. And so by the time he called me, he's like, I know this is not real, but he felt like he had to call me to tell me just to make sure that I was okay with his choice. Right. But before he told me all that, I was like, so what happened and who do we have to pay and how do we do this, Dad? This is my job. And he said, Lori, it's not real. They didn't know things that Cole knows. I just wanted you to know it happened and to, call Cole to make sure they're not trying to do something with him too. So moral of the story is I know better. If anybody knows better, I know better. I stopped counting the breaches I'd responded to at 1,000 a long time ago. So if they can get me, they can get anybody. Okay, next one. Real estate closing agent. This is a real story. A lady was buying a condo on the ocean front in Florida. And, to close, she had to transfer funds to the closing agent. closing agent had instructed her where the funds should go. The person pretending to be the closing agent had then said, oh, we made a mistake in that. You need to send it to this instead. The buyer sent it to the fraudster's account. And they went to the closing, and the closing agent was like, you need to pay. And they didn't really get to the fact that she had paid. And 3 days later, the closing agent's getting a little freaked out and calls and says, we need the money. And then the lady says, oh, well, I sent it before the closing. What? We never received it. And, then they figured out that it had been sent to the wrong account. Now, with wire transfer fraud like that, you have a limited period of time to try and reverse the transaction before the funds issue out to wherever they're going. They do these things in a way that makes it hard to find out in time, so that by the time you find out, it's gone. We were able to get some, but not all of it back. So the real estate agent was then sued by the lady because the lady had taken her IRA funds from her IRA to pay for the condo. She didn't get the condo because she couldn't close on time. So the sellers went to somebody else. And then she was out the money that she had pulled from her IRA and had to pay tax on. She's very unhappy. She sued. So if you're in real estate or anything else where you're closing funds, holding funds, transferring funds, be really aware of this one. Now, the good thing about the electronic funds transfer problem is it's pretty easy to solve with a basic procedure that the most senior people in the company have to make sure everybody agrees and understands applies, and they won't get in trouble if they do it and they made a mistake by doing it because you really did want them to go outside of the protocol. You have a protocol. It requires multi-factor authentication. I'm sure a lot of people are telling you about multi-factor authentication. I can tell you that 3 years ago, if we had a breach and they weren't using multi-factor authentication, there were at least 3 regulators that would be very, very, very unhappy. So imagine how unhappy they are now. Just use it. I mean, how many times have you had to put in a code that came to your phone to get into something? If you can do it to get into wherever, you can do it to get into your corporate network, for goodness sakes. It's really hard to defend that. And then also verify before you transfer, right? You're right, she should have called. And better yet, she should have called and then FaceTimed. Then she would be like, no, I'm not transferring the money. You also need to hear a voice that you recognize. That's it. That's pretty simple. That would keep most of them from happening. Now let's talk about the fun part. How do you make cybersecurity and privacy a competitive advantage? That sounds bizarre. It's expensive, it's hard, it's not anybody's favorite. The day that you get your cybersecurity training, you're like, oh, please, please, right? So most companies of any size, or in the financial institutions environment, or in healthcare, or in various other categories, require their vendors to have cybersecurity that meets certain standards. They require it because if they don't do it and there's a breach at your end, they're still responsible, because when you take the data, you're the data owner. And when you as data owner send it out to others, they're the data processors. Data owners are responsible for everything the data processor does with the data. So if the processor messes up, you are absolutely going to get sued as the data owner for giving it to somebody who didn't have appropriate cybersecurity and failing to adequately supervise them to make sure they protected your data. So you guys are both going to be co-defendants in that litigation. Isn't that fun? The data owner also has the duty of notifying the individuals whose data have been breached. So not only did you give it to the wrong person, wrong entity, but then you have to tell people that you gave it to the wrong entity. And that's like plaintiff's feeding frenzy. Regulators are not going to just investigate the vendor that didn't have great cybersecurity. They're going to investigate you too. So when you use a bad vendor or a vendor that's not up to snuff and they cause an incident, you're going to buy yourself a lawsuit and a regulatory investigation. Doesn't that sound fun? So how does it work in the real world? The laws require vendor management. Using a non-compliant vendor is going to be considered negligent. So it's really hard to get an exception. Now, I've heard vendors say, I can get an exception. It's not hard. Just, my people love me, they'll give it to me. But the problem is those people have to go through a bunch of other people, including outside counsel like me. I have been at a seat in the table where those decisions are being made. And I can tell you for certain sure that they're hardly ever making exceptions for organizations that don't have basic cybersecurity. The only time I see that is when none of them have cybersecurity, adequate cybersecurity. So the bottom line, if you are a legally defensible vendor with your cybersecurity and privacy, you actually have a competitive advantage over other vendors that don't. You're going to win work from them all day long, all night long, all week long. And now we're at questions. Yes.
I'm just curious, you have to breach, so I understand some of this, but in a real life ransom situation, obviously they call you 2 days later, said we have your daughter, we want $20 million. How does it happen in this world, in the ransom world? Because you said it happens real fast. The secretaries are on their computer at 8 in the morning and it starts going to replace the computer. Do they call you 2 days later and say we need $20 million? How does that happen?
It depends. And again, this is where you see what a business some of these organizations are. They have a thing that pops up on your screen. Some of them do, some of them contact you because they obviously have your phone number. There are different ways that they'll come into contact with you, but the way that they come into contact with you is through a customer service environment that sounds an awful lot like what you get at Disney. Disney's awesome. But they're going to treat you really wonderfully. They're going to say, we're doing this for this and that reason, and we're going to make it really easy for you. And here's how you do this, and here's how you do that. And no, you don't have to get anybody else involved because we'll help you. Yeah. Yes. I'm sorry? Well, it makes it easier for you to replicate.
Repeat that for her.
Oh, sorry. She was asking whether it helps if you have virtual machines, whether it gives you any benefit in ransomware. And part of it is it depends on your system and everybody's is different. It certainly makes it easier to replicate a clean one if you have a clean virtual machine left. Systems are 6 to 1, half dozen the other. Yes.
All of these steps sound logical and needed. In the last couple of days, a gigantic company called Sinclair Broadcasting was breached and some of their stations went off the air. It sounds like that no matter how many steps you take, you're going to be really vulnerable and it's going to happen. And I'm going to assume that Sinclair Broadcasting was smart enough to hire the best cybersecurity and they got hit. So I guess my question is this a war where the bad guys are in fact staying ahead of the good guys and it's going to get worse?
Oh, the bad guys are always going to be ahead because it's like whack-a-mole out there, literally. Okay, we push this one down. We know how to deal with this challenge. Oh, they created a new one. And the problem is it's a little like a hydra. You cut one off and many follow. So it is absolutely going to happen. That's why a lot of organizations are going to a zero trust concept where you don't trust anybody and you have to verify that you are who you are. And sometimes they'll even monitor to make sure that your conduct is the way you usually work. It's a complicated thing to clean it out.
Let me respond to that another way. 5% of the Chinese army is dedicated to getting into your computer. Do you think you stand a chance? It's that simple.
Yeah, and it comes back to what we said before. Your tech guys have to be right all day, every day, 24/7 forever. That's not an attainable goal. That's why you need to prepare for when it happens, not if it happens.
Debbie.
What size company is greater risk for being a target? Because I assume smaller companies fail. It's it's not worth their time. But
Oh, I love that question. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I couldn't have planted it better. So a lot of people feel like small companies aren't a target. There are cyber gangs that literally focus on small companies. That's the $10,000 to $50,000 thing is the average that's happening according to one company. So part of what happens with the smaller companies is many don't patch their systems timely. So like when you get the notice that says you're going to update your software tonight, you don't want to wait till tonight. You want to do it now, because the vast majority of those patches that are sent to you are because they've found a vulnerability and here's the fix for it. So sometimes the ransomware folks are people that have found the vulnerability that should have been fixed a month ago. You still haven't fixed it and they're teaching you a lesson. They feel like they're doing good in the world.
And unfortunately, that includes all those stupid iPhone updates, because the majority of them are for a cyber patch, which people don't realize. Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions. And this lady in the back. Jesse, please stand up and speak up.
What I'm hearing from a business standpoint, it's really daunting out there, right? So there's no win, there's no way out. But is there proactive measures?
Absolutely.
And
Multi-factor, yes.
Yes, there's all kinds of things proactive to do, and it's human error. And a lot of times it's not so much just C-suite executives, right, as it is for staff or individuals. I mean, there's so many other factors, and I wanted to really ask and zero in on the executive order, how that relates to everything, zero trust and.
Sure.
How does the executive
there-
order relate to everything?
The Biden administration is becoming very active in cybersecurity, which you would expect because Kamala Harris was very active in cybersecurity in California. And so they are starting to issue pronouncements of standards that you should meet. And what that really means is if you're not meeting the standard and you get breached, the system in California was if you didn't comply with the applicable controls of the 20 CIS critical controls, then you were negligent by statute in California.
And
Still that
liable.
way.
And liable.
Well, once they prove you're negligent, then it's just about damages and how much you got to pay.
How much you got,
Yes.
because they're going to take it all.
Hmm.
All right, Mitch.
Yeah, it's funny, California had how many billions of fraud taken by criminals pretending to be different businesses. So my question is, email is probably the biggest portal for
Yeah.
companies. We use a product called Iron Scales as a phishing scammer. It works very well. Do anything about it in the comments or other kind of email
Sure.
firewalls you would recommend?
There are-
Email firewalls is what you're asking.
There are
What are
a
they?
wide variety of tools that can be deployed to make your email system harder to breach. And it's a little bit like, when a lion's chasing 2 people, you only have to be faster than the other guy. You want to be a less easy target, so patch your stuff. You can do other things to protect your system. And what we do is help companies have a cybersecurity and privacy program where they prioritize the things that they're going to do based on the type of data that they have and the risk they have. So for you all, your email is your biggest risk. You've taken an extra step to protect that. That helps me show that you're not clueless and careless. You're actually paying attention. You're doing something important. You made yourself more legally defensible. So that's awesome. And to your comment, it's not all doom and gloom. It's like, hey, you can do something. You can make this an opportunity, and you don't have to do much to be at the baseline level.
Okay, we have a problem here. I said 2 more questions, but Tom Meyer always asks the first question. Tom, if you tell a story, I'm going to cut you off. You have the last question.
So my question is for our own personal computers, our kids, our grandkids, our students. Do you have any tips for us about how we individually ought to be thinking about this problem?
You should be prepared to have ransomware hit your machine. Absolutely. You should be prepared for that. It happens because the botnets, which are connected computers that are controlled by a command force, they go everywhere, and they're checking, they're pinging systems, every system they come in contact with, to see if they have the particular vulnerability that it's designed to attack. And it can be my computer, your computer, a big corporation's computer, you know, a mid-sized company, a little-sized company. They do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them for a long time. So you have to be prepared. So again, make yourself a thumb drive of all the pictures you care about, update it, back up your computer on a separate thing, take some good reasonable steps, use two-factor authentication, use a VPN when you're not in your own system, always, because otherwise you're communicating in the clear. So if you and I are sitting in a coffee shop and we both have our computers on and we're on the Wi-Fi, somebody who's a hacker, not me, because I don't do that, can hack into your machine because you're on the public Wi-Fi.
I am going to print out my contacts. So
Absolutely.
That's the person sitting next to you right now. Marie Diaz, one of our other partner members, has been that's why she could be hacking you right now, Tom. So just be aware of that. Ladies and gentlemen, your new cybersecurity attorney, Laura Nugent.
Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it.
This has been a first for me, an attorney that can speak in normal terms, that can speak, that I can understand. Thank you, Lori. And for you, come over here. For you, we have a gift, and it's The Nature of Excellence. It's a beautiful book by Lee and Julie Holan. They're good friends of ours, members here. And this book was first given to me by Colleen Barrett, and it's the book she gave to the Southwest Airlines Board of Directors when she stepped down, and gave them a CD. And she's, Herb Keller was my mentor, and we lost him and a lot of great people in a short time. But anyway, this is for you, as well as dinner for two at McGuire's. And you can find somebody to take. And breakfast for two, or lunch at Awake. So you got a full day of food. And then in between that, you could put in a massage or a facial at Grand Spa. Thank you very, very, very much. Appreciate you. Ladies and gentlemen, Laura Nugent.